They say money can't buy happiness, but it can certainly buy silence. My name is Sarah Chen, and I'm about to tell you how I discovered that the charming man who owned half the buildings in our neighborhood was living a double life that would shatter everything I thought I knew about trust, wealth, and redemption. What I found in the basement of 847 Riverside Avenue didn't just change my life, it saved dozens of others. But before I could become a hero, I had to survive becoming his next target. If you've ever trusted someone completely, only to realize you never really knew them at all, then you'll understand why I'm still looking over my shoulder 3 years later. Stay with me, because this story gets darker before it gets lighter, and the truth I uncovered is something everyone in your own neighborhood needs to hear. The perfect landlord. The first time I met Richard Castellano, I thought I'd won the lottery. It was a brutally cold February morning in 2019 when I stood outside the Victorian brownstone on Riverside Avenue, my breath forming small clouds in the freezing air. I'd been apartment hunting for 6 weeks, sleeping on my sister's couch, watching my savings account dwindle with each passing day. Every landlord I'd met had been the same, disinterested, mechanical, treating potential tenants like inconvenient statistics rather than human beings desperate for a place to call home. Richard was different from the moment he opened that heavy oak door. "You must be Sarah," he said warmly, extending a hand that was neither too firm nor too weak. "Please come in from that awful cold. I've got coffee brewing upstairs." He was in his late 50s, distinguished in that effortless way some men achieve. Silver hair perfectly groomed, wearing a casual but expensive sweater over dark jeans. His smile reached his eyes, crinkling the corners in a way that suggested someone who smiled often and genuinely. The house smelled like vanilla and old wood, comforting and solid. As he led me through the building, I fell in love with every detail. The apartment was a third-floor unit with original hardwood floors, crown molding, and windows that flooded the space with natural light. The kitchen had been recently renovated with granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. It was perfect. It was also $200 below my maximum budget. "I know you've been through a tough time," Richard said gently as we sat in the sun-drenched living room. He'd clearly read the hesitation in my rental application. The gap in employment, the reference from a domestic violence shelter instead of a previous landlord. "I believe everyone deserves a second chance, a fresh start." Those words cracked something open inside me. I'd been so afraid that my past would follow me forever, that David's abuse would mark me as damaged goods even after I'd finally found the courage to leave. But here was this stranger, this wealthy property owner who could have chosen anyone, offering me not just an apartment but dignity. "I grew up poor," Richard continued, his voice taking on a distant quality. "My mother worked 3 jobs just to keep us fed. I remember what it felt like to be judged, to have doors closed in your face before you even got a chance to prove yourself. When I finally made my money in real estate development, I promised myself I'd be different. I'd be the landlord I wish we'd had." I signed the lease that afternoon, my hand shaking slightly as I wrote my name. Richard noticed and gently placed his hand over mine for just a moment. "You're safe here, Sarah. I promise you that." The first 3 months were blissful. Richard wasn't just a landlord. He became a presence in the building, in our lives. There were 8 units total in the brownstone, and he seemed to know everyone's story. There was Mrs. Kowalski on the first floor, a widow whose pension barely covered her expenses. Richard had kept her rent the same for 7 years. There were the Martinez twins in 2B, college students he'd given a break to because he believed in investing in young people's futures. There was James, a veteran with PTSD in apartment 3A, whose service dog Richard had not only allowed but welcomed enthusiastically. We were his tenants, but he made us feel like family. Richard hosted monthly dinners in the building's common room, a beautiful space on the ground floor with exposed brick walls and a fireplace that actually worked. He'd cook elaborate Italian meals, his grandmother's recipes, he said, and we'd all gather around the long wooden table like some kind of urban commune. He'd ask about our lives, remember small details from previous conversations, offer advice when asked, and support even when it wasn't. "How's the job search going?" he asked me one evening in April, refilling my wine glass with a Chianti that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Slowly, I admitted. I'd been applying to graphic design positions everywhere, but my portfolio had gaps, and my confidence was still rebuilding brick by fragile brick. I had a second interview last week, but I haven't heard back. You'll find the right fit, he assured me. You're talented, Sarah. I've seen the work you showed me. Any company would be lucky to have you. He paused, then added casually, if you need another month on rent, just let me know. Don't stress yourself into taking the wrong job. That was Richard. Always generous, always understanding, always somehow knowing exactly what someone needed to hear. I wasn't the only one he helped. When James had a medical emergency and couldn't work for 6 weeks, Richard didn't just waive his rent. He quietly paid his utilities too. When the Martinez twins' mother got sick back in Honduras, Richard helped them navigate the process of getting emergency travel documents and lent them money for plane tickets, refusing to discuss repayment terms. Mrs. Kowalski treated him like the son she'd never had. Such a good boy, she'd say in her thick Polish accent. So kind. Not like these landlords you read about always trying to squeeze people. By summer, I'd landed a position at a small design firm, nothing fancy but stable, and I was starting to feel like myself again. The woman who'd fled her apartment in the middle of the night with nothing but a backpack and a broken phone seemed like someone from another lifetime. I was laughing again, sleeping through the night, even going on a few dates. Richard noticed everything. You look happy, he said one Saturday morning when we crossed paths in the hallway. I was heading out for a morning run, something I'd recently started doing, reclaiming my body from the hypervigilance that had defined it for so long. I am, I told him honestly. Thanks in large part to you. This place, this community you've built, it saved me. He seemed genuinely touched, his eyes getting slightly misty. That's all I've ever wanted, to create safe spaces for people, to be someone who helps rather than hurts. I thought I understood him completely. I thought I knew exactly who Richard Castellano was, a wealthy man who'd never forgotten his roots, who used his success to lift others up, who proved that landlords didn't have to be soulless corporations or slumlords. He was proof that good people existed, that kindness still mattered in a world that often felt cruel and transactional. I was so incredibly, devastatingly wrong. The first crack in the perfect facade appeared on a Tuesday night in late August. I'd been living in the brownstone for 6 months, and I'd grown comfortable enough that I often worked late into the night, my apartment windows open to catch the summer breeze, my music playing softly as I worked on freelance projects. Around 11:30 I got up to get water and happened to glance out my window. The brownstone sat on a corner lot, and my windows faced both the street and the side alley. I saw Richard's Mercedes pull into the narrow alley beside the building, unusual because he normally parked in the small lot behind the property. He got out quickly, checking the street before moving to his trunk. He opened it and pulled out something large wrapped in what looked like a tarp or heavy blanket. The way he carried it, the way his body strained slightly under the weight, made my stomach tighten with an instinct I couldn't name. He disappeared around the back of the building toward the basement entrance. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe he'd bought furniture. Maybe it was building supplies. Maybe I was still so damaged from my relationship with David that I saw danger where none existed, that I couldn't trust my own perceptions anymore. But sleep didn't come easily that night. And when I finally drifted off, I dreamed of basements and locked doors and muffled sounds I couldn't quite place. The next few weeks passed normally. Richard was his usual self at the September dinner, warm, engaging, asking everyone about their lives. But I found myself watching him differently, noticing small things. The way his smile sometimes didn't quite reach his eyes, the way he'd occasionally check his phone and his expression would darken for just a moment before the mask of geniality returned. The way he'd sometimes disappear into the basement for hours, emerging with dirt under his fingernails that he'd quickly scrub away. I started paying attention to the building's rhythms in a way I hadn't before. Richard had always been present, but now I noticed he had patterns. Every Tuesday and Friday night, he'd arrive in that same rushed way, always parking in the alley, always carrying something to the basement. He'd stay down there for an hour, sometimes 2, and when he emerged, he'd be slightly disheveled, his expensive clothes rumpled in a way they never were otherwise. The basement itself was technically off-limits to tenants. Old building, lots of maintenance equipment, pipes, electrical. I don't want anyone getting hurt, Richard had explained when I first moved in. If you need anything from storage, just let me know and I'll grab it for you. It had seemed reasonable at the time. Now it felt different. Suspicious. I tried to talk myself out of my growing unease. This was Richard, the man who'd given me a second chance when I needed it most. The man who treated his tenants like family. The man who'd restored my faith in human kindness. What was I doing? Spying on him, entertaining dark thoughts about someone who'd been nothing but good to me. But trauma changes you in fundamental ways. It teaches you to trust your gut even when your brain says you're being paranoid, and my gut was screaming that something was deeply, terribly wrong. The breaking point came in mid-October. I'd been working late again, this time on a rush project for a client, and I'd lost track of time completely. When I finally looked up from my laptop, it was nearly 2 in the morning. I stood to stretch, my back aching from hours, hunched over my desk, and wandered to the window for some air. That's when I saw her. A young woman, maybe early 20s, being guided, or was it guided, or supported, or forced, from Richard's Mercedes toward the basement entrance. Even from 3 floors up, even in the dim light of the single bulb above the basement door, I could tell something was wrong. She was unsteady on her feet, her movements sluggish and uncoordinated. Richard had his arm around her waist, holding her up, his head constantly swiveling to check if anyone was watching. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. I froze, still partially hidden by my curtain but clearly visible enough that he'd seen me. His expression in that moment was something I'll never forget, a flash of calculation, of assessment, of threat that vanished so quickly I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. Then his face transformed back into Richard, the concerned landlord, and he gave me a small wave, as if to say, just helping someone who's had too much to drink. You know how it is. But I did know. I knew exactly what it looked like when someone was incapacitated, when they couldn't consent, when they were being taken somewhere against their will even if they were too impaired to resist. I'd seen it in college at parties, had intervened when I could. I'd experienced a milder version myself once, waking up fuzzy and confused with David standing over me, holding a glass of wine I didn't remember drinking that much of. The young woman disappeared into the basement with Richard, and the door closed behind them. I stood at my window shaking for 20 minutes, then an hour, then 2. My phone was in my hand, 911 already typed into the screen. But what would I say? I saw my landlord help an unsteady woman into a basement. That was the problem with men like Richard, men who built such perfect facades, such networks of goodwill and positive reputation. Who would believe me? He'd given me a discount on rent. He'd been understanding about my past. People would think I was unstable, paranoid, a woman so damaged by her abusive ex that she saw danger everywhere. But I knew. Deep in my bones, in that place where instinct lives beneath rational thought, I knew. At 4:15 in the morning, Richard emerged from the basement alone. He looked tired, and there was something dark on his shirt. Oil? Paint? Something else? He got in his Mercedes and drove away. The woman didn't come. Out. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat on my couch, wrapped in a blanket despite the apartment's warmth, and tried to figure out what to do. By the time the sun rose, I'd made a decision that would either save lives or destroy my own. I was going to get into that basement. But I had no idea that what I'd find there would be so much worse than anything I'd imagined. And I had no idea that by the time I uncovered the truth, Richard would already be planning how to silence me permanently. The next morning, I called in sick to work, something I rarely did, but I couldn't focus on design mock-ups when every fiber of my being was screaming that something terrible had happened just floors below where I'd been sleeping for months. I watched from my window as Richard left the building at his usual time, 9:30 sharp, dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, briefcase in hand. The perfect image of a successful businessman heading to manage his real estate empire. I waited 20 more minutes, making absolutely sure he was gone before I crept downstairs. The basement door was locked, as always. I'd expected that. What I hadn't expected was how easy it would be to find a key. Richard kept a spare set in the building's utility closet on the first floor. I'd seen him grab them once when Mrs. Kowalski had locked herself out. My hands trembled as I sorted through the labeled keys until I found one marked simply B. The basement stairs were old wood, creaking under my weight despite my attempts to move quietly. The air grew colder and damper with each step, and there was a smell I couldn't quite identify. Something chemical mixed with earth and something else. something organ. I see, and wrong. The basement was larger than I'd expected, a maze of rooms beneath the century-old building. The main area held the building's utilities, furnace, water heater, electrical panels, all legitimate and exactly what Richard had described. But there was a newer door at the back, solid metal with a heavy deadbolt. It looked profoundly out of place in the old stone foundation. I should have left then, called the police, let professionals handle it. But the thought of that young woman, the way she'd moved, the way Richard had looked at me when I'd seen them, I couldn't walk away. Not yet. The same key that had opened the basement door fit the deadbolt. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears as I pushed the door open. The room beyond was illuminated by battery-powered camping lanterns, casting harsh shadows against walls that had been soundproofed with foam panels. There was a mattress on the floor, rumpled and stained, medical supplies on a metal shelf, syringes, vials, bandages, a video camera on a tripod, its red recording light off but its lens pointed toward the mattress, and in the corner, chained to a pipe, was the young woman I'd seen the night before. She was awake, barely, her eyes unfocused and terrified. She looked at me without really seeing me, her lips moving soundlessly. There was a bruise forming on her arm, needle marks visible even in the dim light. A bucket in the corner served as a makeshift toilet. She'd been sick at some point, I could smell it. "Oh God," I whispered, and her eyes suddenly focused, latching onto me with desperate intensity. "Please," she managed to croak out, her voice destroyed from screaming no one had eared through the soundproofing. "Please help me." He said no one would come, that no one would believe me even if I escaped, that I was just another. Her voice broke into sobs. I rushed to her, examining the chain. It was secured with a combination lock, professional and unbreakable without tools. "I'm going to get you out," I promised, my own voice shaking. "I'm calling the police right now." "No." Her urgency startled me. "He has police friends," he told me. He said one of his regular Tuesday golf partners is a captain, that he donates to the Police Benevolent Association, that everyone thinks he's a pillar of the community. He said that's how he's done this for so long, because people like him, people trust him, people choose to believe him over girls like me. Girls like me. The phrase hit me like a physical blow. How many had there been? How long had this been going on, happening right beneath my feet while I slept peacefully upstairs, grateful for his kindness? "What's your name?" I asked, trying to steady myself, to think clearly. "Jessica. Jessica Monroe. I'm a student at community college. I saw an ad on Craigslist for a babysitting job, really good pay, and he seemed so nice when I met him at the coffee shop. So normal. Like somebody's dad. He said his daughter lived with his ex-wife but visited on weekends, that he needed occasional help. The first 2 times were fine. There really was a little girl, she was sweet, everything seemed legitimate. Then the 3rd time, her voice trailed off into ragged breathing. He picked me up like always, but instead of going to his house, he brought me here. Something he gave me in the coffee. I don't remember most of it. When I woke up, I was here. How long? 3 days. I think. It's hard to tell down here. He comes twice a day. She couldn't finish, but she didn't need to. The camera, the mattress, the way her clothes were torn, the story told itself. Rage and horror fought for dominance in my chest. This man who'd been so kind to me, who'd created such a beautiful community atmosphere, who'd helped so many people, he was a monster wearing a perfectly crafted mask. And he'd been doing this for how long? How many Jessicas had there been? I took out my phone, hands shaking so badly I could barely hold it. No signal in the basement. Of course not. The concrete and stone were too thick. "I need to go upstairs to call," I told Jessica. "I'll come right back, I promise. I won't leave you here." "He'll kill you," she said flatly. "If he knows you found me, if he thinks you're going to tell anyone. He told me what he'd do. He has a furnace. He said that's how he'd gotten rid of the others who caused problems. That he'd make it look like an accident. That everyone would believe sweet, generous Richard Castellano when he said it was tragic. But these things happen in old buildings. Others." The word hung in the air between us like a curse. My phone was still in my hand, useless in the basement. I looked at Jessica, at this terrified young woman who'd trusted the wrong person, who'd walked into a trap baited with normalcy and kindness. I thought about all the times Richard had been alone with each of us, how vulnerable we'd all been, how completely we'd trusted him. "I'm not leaving you here," I repeated, "and I'm not letting him get away with this. But I need to be smart about this. Do you know where he keeps the combination to your lock?" She shook her head. "He uses his phone. I've seen him look at it before he opens it. And Sarah," she'd somehow known my name, probably from hearing Richard talk about his tenants. "There are files." He showed me pictures and videos of others. He said he had hundreds of hours of footage, years worth. He archives everything. Said it's his collection, like we're objects. There's a hard drive somewhere, maybe up in his apartment. If you call the police and they can't find the evidence, if it's just my word against his. She was right. Richard was meticulous, careful, patient. He'd been doing this for years without getting caught because he understood exactly how the system worked, how reputation and charm could be armor against accusation. We needed evidence that was undeniable. "Okay," I said, thinking fast despite the adrenaline flooding my system. "Okay. I'm going to go upstairs, I'm going to call someone I trust, and then we're going to figure out how to get you out of here and make sure he can never do this again. Can you hold on a little longer?" "I've held on this long," Jessica said, and despite everything, there was steel in her voice. "I've been counting minutes, planning. I knew someone would come eventually. I knew I wasn't going to die in this basement." Her strength in the face of such horror almost broke me. I wanted to cry, to rage, to tear the building apart with my bare hands. Instead, I squeezed her hand and promised, "I'll be back within the hour. I swear on everything I have." I locked the door behind me, hating myself for doing it, but knowing I couldn't risk Richard discovering. Gee, I'd been down here. I climbed the stairs on shaking legs, my mind racing through options. I couldn't call 911, not yet, not without evidence, not when Jessica was right that his connections might give him warning. But I knew someone who might help. Someone whose entire career was built on exposing corruption and bringing down people who hid behind respectability. My sister Maya was an investigative journalist. We'd been close once before David had isolated me from everyone I loved. Since I'd left him, we'd been slowly rebuilding our relationship. She'd helped me find this apartment, had celebrated with me when I'd moved in, had met Richard and pronounced him one of the good ones. The guilt I felt about not trusting her judgment sooner was crushing. But right now, I needed her professional experience and her contacts more than anything. I called her from my apartment, trying to keep my voice steady. "Maya, I need you to come to my apartment right now. Don't call first. Don't text Richard to say you're visiting. Just come. And bring your recorder, your camera, everything. I found something, and it's bad. Really bad." To her credit, she didn't ask questions, didn't hesitate. "I'm 20 minutes away. Sarah, are you safe right now?" "For now. But Maya, it's Richard. He's not who we thought. He's not who anyone thinks." There was a long pause. "Then, I'm leaving right now. Lock your door. Don't open it for anyone but me." Those 20 minutes felt like hours. I kept replaying everything, every dinner, every conversation, every moment I'd thought Richard was being kind. Had he been evaluating me? Deciding whether I'd be a good victim? What had protected me when Jess, Ika, and however many others hadn't been protected? The answer came to me with sickening clarity. I'd been too visible, too connected to the other tenants, too integrated into the building community he'd created. I had a sister who checked on me, a job where people would notice if I didn't show up, a history as a domestic violence survivor that meant agencies knew my name. I was too risky, so he'd been kind to me instead. Used me as another layer of his disguise. Look how I helped this vulnerable woman. Look what a good person I am. When Maya knocked, our agreed-upon pattern, 3 quick raps followed by 2 slow ones, I nearly sobbed with relief. I let her in and locked the door behind her. "Tell me everything," she said, setting up her recorder, her professional mask sliding into place even as I could see the worry in her eyes. So I did. I told her about the night I'd seen Richard bringing Jessica to the basement, about what I'd found that morning, about Jessica's account of others, about the evidence that might exist somewhere in the building. Maya listened without interrupting, taking notes, her expression growing darker with each detail. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "We need to get Jessica out first, before anything else. Once she's safe, we can worry about evidence and arrests and prosecution. Do you trust me?" "Yes. Then here's what we're going to do. The unraveling. Maya's plan was both simple and terrifying. We would wait until Richard returned home that evening, when he typically spent an hour in his second-floor office handling business, and we'd use that window to get Jessica out. Maya would create a distraction, a fake complaint about a burst pipe in her apartment. She didn't live in the building, but Richard didn't need to know that. While I went back down to the basement with bolt cutters she'd brought from her car. Bolt cutters won't work on that chain, I protested, thinking of the heavy links that secured Jessica. It's industrial grade. They're not for the chain, Maya explained. They're for the pipe she's attached to. These old buildings have lead pipes that are softer than you'd think. We cut the pipe, she slips the chain off, and we get her out through the alley entrance to my car before Richard even knows what's happening. It wasn't foolproof, but it was the best option we had that didn't involve waiting for authorities who might or might not believe us, who might or might not arrive before Richard decided to move Jessica, or worse. We spent the day preparing. Maya contacted a trusted friend of hers at a women's shelter, explaining the situation in vague terms and arranging for Jessica to be taken somewhere safe the moment we got her out. I packed a bag of clothes for Jessica, we were similar sizes, and gathered first aid supplies. Every sound in the building made me jump, convinced Richard would somehow know what we were planning. At 6:45, exactly on schedule, Richard's Mercedes pulled into the lot. I watched from my window as he got out, loosening his tie, looking every inch the successful businessman winding down after a long day. He waved to Mr. Martinez, who was taking out his trash, and called out something that made the older man laugh. The perfect neighbor. The perfect monster. Maya had positioned herself in the lobby, dressed professionally with her hair pulled back, looking every inch the legitimate tenant with a legitimate complaint. I heard her intercept Richard as he entered, her voice pitched to sound stressed but not panicked. Mr. Castellano, thank goodness you're here. I'm visiting my sister Sarah in 3C, and I noticed water dripping from the ceiling in the second-floor hallway. It looks like it might be coming from the old radiator in the vacant unit. I saw the water pooling near the door. Richard's voice was instantly concerned. Oh no, that unit's been having issues with the heating system. Let me grab my tools and take a look. Which radiator did you say? As their voices faded toward the second floor, I slipped out of my apartment with Maya's heavy-duty bolt cutters hidden in a duffel bag. My heart was hammering so hard I thought I might pass out, but I forced myself to move steadily, normally, just another tenant going about their business. The basement key was slick in my sweating palm. The stairs seemed steeper than they had that morning, the shadows deeper. Every creak of the old wood sounded like a gunshot in my ears. Jessica was awake when I opened the inner door, her eyes lighting up with desperate hope when she saw me. You came back. I promised I would. I showed her the bolt cutters. We're getting you out of here right now. My sister is upstairs distracting Richard, but we don't have much time. The pipe was exactly as Maya had predicted. Old lead that had gone soft with age. It took 3 attempts and all my strength, but the bolt cutters finally bit through with a grinding screech that made both of us freeze, listening for any sound from above. Nothing. Just the building's normal sounds, water running through pipes, the furnace humming, distant footsteps on the floor above. Jessica slipped the chain off the severed pipe, and I helped her stand. She was unsteady, weakened by days of captivity and whatever drugs Richard had given her, but adrenaline was doing its work. I wrapped her in a coat I'd brought, partly for warmth and partly to hide how disheveled she looked. Can you walk? I whispered. I'll crawl if I have to, she answered, and I believed her. We made it to the alley door without incident. Maya's car was right where she'd said it would be, engine running, a woman I didn't recognize in the driver's seat. As soon as Jessica was safely inside, the car pulled away smoothly, looking like nothing more than a visitor leaving after a social call. I stood in the alley for a moment, breathing hard, hardly believing we'd pulled it off. Jessica was safe. She was out. Whatever happened next, Richard couldn't hurt her anymore. But Maya was still upstairs with him, and we still had no evidence beyond Jessica's testimony. Testimony that a good defense lawyer could tear apart by painting her as unstable, a drug user, someone looking for a payout from a wealthy man. I needed to find that hard drive. The thought was insane. I should leave now, while I still could, while Richard was distracted. Let the professionals handle the rest. But I kept thinking about what Jessica had said. Hundreds of hours of footage, years' worth. How many victims were on those drives? How many were still missing, their families wondering what had happened to them? How many were dead? I thought of the furnace Jessica had mentioned. Richard's apartment was on the second floor. Or the entire front half of the building. I'd been inside it exactly once, when he'd invited all the tenants for a holiday party last December. It had been beautifully decorated, filled with expensive furniture and tasteful art. Everything elegant and curated to present the image of a sophisticated, cultured man. Somewhere in that apartment was the truth about who Richard Castellano really was. I heard voices in the hallway above, Maya still maintaining her cover, Richard explaining something about pressure valves and old building quirks. She was buying me time, maybe without even knowing I needed it. Richard's apartment door was locked, but I'd learned something during my months of rebuilding my life after David. Locks can be picked if you're determined enough. I'd taken a class at the community center, taught by a former locksmith who believed women should know how to get themselves out of, or into, anywhere they needed to be. My hands shook as I worked the tension wrench and pick, my fingers clumsy with fear and urgency. The lock clicked open. Richard's apartment was exactly as I remembered it, pristine, elegant, giving absolutely no hint of the darkness that lived within its owner. I moved quickly through the rooms, searching for anything that might hide a hard drive. Desk drawers yielded only normal paperwork. The bookshelf held actual books. The closets contained clothes and shoes and normal human possessions. I was about to give up, to accept that Richard was too smart to keep evidence where anyone might find it, when I noticed something odd about his home office. The room was smaller than it should be given the building's dimensions. I paced it out, then checked the hallway. There was at least 6 feet of space unaccounted for, a hidden room. My fingers traced the bookshelf along the back wall, pressing and pulling, searching for any kind of mechanism. I was about to give up when I accidentally leaned heavily against a particular spot and heard a soft click. The bookshelf swung inward. The space beyond was small, barely larger than a closet, but it was meticulously organized. Metal shelving held external hard drives, dozens of them, each labeled with dates going back nearly 15 years. A laptop sat on a small desk, closed but with cables connecting it to the drives. There was a file cabinet in the corner. And on the wall, like some kind of sick shrine, were photographs, dozens of them. Young women, all roughly the same age as Jessica, all with the same terrified look in their eyes. Some of the photos looked recent. Others were faded, years old. I felt bile rise in my throat. I grabbed the laptop and as many hard drives as I could fit in my bag, working frantically. Each one I took felt impossibly heavy, weighted with the suffering they contained. I wanted to take them all, to erase every trace of Richard's evil, but I could only carry so much. That's when I heard the apartment door open. "Sarah?" Richard's voice was pleasant, curious. "I saw you come in here. Is everything all right?" I froze, my bag half full of evidence, standing in his secret room with photographs of his victims staring down at me from the walls. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but there was only one way out of the apartment, and Richard was blocking it. "I know you're here," he continued, his voice moving closer. The door was open. "Did you need something? You know you're always welcome to come to me if you need help." The same kind voice. The same gentle tone he'd used when he'd given me this apartment, when he'd told me I was safe here. My hands clenched around the laptop in my bag. I stepped out of the hidden room to face him. Richard stood in the doorway of his office, and for just a moment, his mask slipped completely. The expression on his face was one of pure calculation, assessment, threat. Then he saw what I was holding, saw the open bookshelf behind me, and something changed in his eyes. "Sarah," he said softly, "what have you done?" "Jessica is gone," I told him, surprised by how steady my voice was. "She's safe, and I have your files." He smiled then, and it was nothing like the warm smiles I'd seen before. This smile was cold, reptilian. "Do you? And what exactly do you think you're going to do with them?" "I'm going to make sure everyone knows what you are." Richard laughed, actually laughed. "Oh, Sarah, sweet, damaged Sarah. Who's going to believe you? You with your history of abuse, your PTSD, your demonstrated poor judgment in relationships. I've been a pillar of this community for 20 years. I donate to charities, I serve on boards, I help people." He took a step closer. You're just another unstable woman making wild accusations against a man who was kind enough to give her a chance. I have evidence. Evidence that you stole from my private property after breaking into my apartment. Evidence that any decent lawyer will have thrown out before trial. Evidence that you, a known victim seeking shelter, might have manufactured or tampered with. Another step. It's over, Sar. Ah, you've made a terrible mistake, but I'm willing to be forgiving. Give me the bag, we'll talk about Jessica's delusions and we can all move forward. I backed up until I hit the wall. The police are already on their way. No, they're not. If they were, you wouldn't still be here. You'd be safely outside waiting for them. He was close enough now that I could smell his cologne, expensive and cloying. You came here alone because you wanted to be a hero, because you wanted to fix things yourself. I understand that impulse. It's what got you into trouble with David too, wasn't it? Always thinking you could handle things, always believing you knew best. The mention of David's name in his mouth made me feel sick. How much did he know about my past? How carefully had he researched me before accepting me as a tenant? Here's what's going to happen, Richard continued, his voice taking on a lecturing quality, like a professor explaining something to a slow student. You're going to give me that bag, then you're going to come with me down to the basement, where we'll have a long talk about the importance of minding one's own business. It might get unpleasant, I won't lie to you, Sarah. You've created a real problem for me and there will be consequences. But if you cooperate, if you're smart about this, you might survive. Some of the others did, at least for a while. His hand reached out toward the bag. That's when Maya hit him with the cast-iron skillet she'd grabbed from his kitchen. Richard went down hard, blood blooming from a gash on his temple. Maya stood over him, the skillet raised for another blow if needed, her chest heaving. That was for every woman you sick fuck. I'd never loved my sister more than in that moment. Is he? I couldn't finish the question. Breathing, Maya confirmed, kicking Richard's phone away from his reaching hand. But we need to move fast. I already called the police, the real call, not the fake complaint. But I needed to make sure you were okay first. We could hear sirens in the distance growing closer. Maya grabbed my hand, the one not clutching the bag of evidence. Come on, let's go meet them outside, where there are witnesses, where everything is documented. We're not giving him any chance to twist this. We ran. Down the stairs, through the lobby where Mrs. Kowalski stood in her doorway, looking confused, out onto the street where the Martinez twins were staring at the approaching police cars. By the time the first officers arrived, we were standing on the sidewalk in full view of half the neighborhood, my bag of evidence at my feet, both of us ready to tell everything we knew. The next hours were a blur of statements and questions and more police than I'd ever seen in one place. Detectives arrived, federal agents, people in suits who didn't identify themselves but seemed to be in charge. They evacuated the building, treating it as a crime scene. They found the basement room. They found Richard's hidden office. They arrested him as he was regaining consciousness, reading him his rights while he was still dazed and bleeding. And they found the bodies, 3 of them, buried in the dirt floor of the building's sub-basement in a section that had been sealed off years ago. Women who'd been missing for years, cases that had gone cold, families who'd never stopped hoping for answers. The hard drives I'd taken contained evidence of 17 more victims over 15 years. Some, like Jessica, had survived. Others had disappeared. Some had been found dead, their deaths attributed to accidents or suicides or overdoses. But the videos showed the truth, showed Richard's careful planning, his meticulous documentation of his own atrocities. He'd been right about one thing: he was a pillar of the community. The outcry when the story broke was massive. People couldn't believe it, didn't want to believe it. How could someone who'd done so much good also be capable of such evil? But that was the point I came to understand. The good was part of the camouflage, the charity, the kindness to tenants, the community dinners. They weren't separate from his crimes, they were integral to them. They created the perfect disguise, made him untouchable, gave him access to vulnerable people who trusted him because everyone said he was trustworthy. The trial lasted 3 months. I testified. Maya testified. Jessica testified, brave and unflinching, staring Richard down as she described what he'd done. So did 7 other survivors who'd been found through his files. Women who'd been too afraid to come forward before because they'd thought no one would believe them over the word of Richard Castellano. respected businessman and philanthropist. The jury took 4 hours to convict him on all counts. He's in prison now, life without possibility of parole. Sometimes I wonder if he thinks about us, the women who refuse to be silent, who refuse to let his respectability shield him from justice. I hope he does. I hope it eats at him the way his crimes eat at us. The brownstone. One was sold to a developer who's turning it into condos. None of us wanted to stay, not after knowing what had happened in the basement, under our feet, while we'd slept peacefully above. Mrs. Kowalski moved in with her daughter in New Jersey. The Martinez twins transferred to a different school. James found a place through a veterans program. I got a new apartment across town, smaller and less charming, but mine in a way the brownstone never could be again. Maya and I are closer than ever. Trauma has a way of burning away the superficial and leaving only what's real. Jessica is in college now, studying criminal justice. She wants to help other survivors, to create better systems for believing and protecting victims. We meet for coffee sometimes, two women who share a terrible bond but refuse to let it define us. I still have nightmares. I suspect I always will. But I also have something else, the knowledge that when it mattered most, when I saw something wrong, I didn't look away. I didn't tell myself I was being paranoid or that I should trust the nice man who'd been kind to me. I listened to my instincts, the ones that trauma had sharpened into tools of survival. People ask me sometimes how I knew, how I saw through Richard's disguise when so many others didn't. The truth is, I'm not sure I did see through it, not consciously, not at first, but surviving abuse teaches you to read micro-expressions, to notice inconsistencies, to trust the feeling in your gut that says something is wrong even when you can't articulate why. It teaches you that monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they look like saviors. The story made national news. There have been NK pieces and documentaries and true crime podcasts. Some focus on Richard, trying to understand how someone becomes capable of such sustained evil. Others focus on the systemic failures that let him operate for so long, the way wealth and respectability can be armor, the way we recondition to doubt victims, especially women. But the message I want people to take from this story isn't about Richard. It's not even really about me. It's about Jessica, and the 16 other women whose names were on those hard drives, and the countless others who faced similar situations. It's about the importance of believing people when they say something is wrong, even if the person they're accusing seems beyond reproach. It's about understanding that predators often hide in plain sight, using their good deeds as camouflage for their crimes. It's about the fact that your instincts exist for a reason, that feeling of wrongness, that sense that something is off even when you can't explain why. Pay attention to it. Trust it. Don't let anyone, no matter how kind they seem, talk you out of what your gut is telling you. And if you see something, if you know something is wrong, speak up. Even if you think no one will believe you, even if you're afraid, even if it costs you something. Because silence protects predators, it always has. And the only way to stop them is to refuse to be silent. 3 years later, I'm still processing what happened. Still working through the guilt of not seeing it sooner. The anger at how close Richard came to getting away with it. The grief for the women who didn't survive. But I'm also working, living, even thriving in my own way. I changed careers. I'm aiming to be a victim's advocate now, using my design skills to create resources and materials that help survivors navigate the legal system. It feels right in a way my previous work never did, like I've found a purpose in the worst experience of my life. The brownstone is gone now, replaced by luxury apartments that rent for 3 times what we paid. The new residents have no idea what happened in that building, what horrors unfolded in the basement while Richard Castellano played the role of the perfect landlord upstairs. But we know, the survivors know, and we carry that knowledge forward, transforming it from a wound into a weapon against the systems that enable men like Richard. I think about that night I saw him bringing Jessica to the basement, how close I came to talking myself out of what I'd seen, how easy it would have been to accept his explanation, to choose the comfort of believing in his kindness over the difficult truth of his cruelty. That's what he counted on. What all predators count on. That we'll choose the comfortable lie over the difficult truth. That we'll value our own peace of mind over someone else's safety. I almost did. And if I had, Jessica might not be alive today. Neither might the 7 other women he had plans for, whose names were found on a list in his office, potential future victims he was already researching, already selecting. But I didn't choose comfort. I chose to trust myself, to believe in my own perceptions even when they contradicted everything I thought I knew about Richard. That's the lesson I hope people take from this story. Not that every landlord is a predator, or that every kind gesture is manipulation, or that we should live our lives in constant suspicion, but that we should trust ourselves. That when something feels wrong, we should investigate rather than dismiss. That we should believe victims, support survivors, and never assume that someone's public persona tells the whole story of who they are. Richard Castellano taught me a lot of things, though none of them were the lessons he intended. He taught me that evil often comes wrapped in kindness, that the most dangerous predators are the ones who've perfected the art of appearing safe, that wealth and respectability can be masks for darkness. But more importantly, he taught me, inadvertently, unwillingly, that survivors are stronger than we know, that speaking up, even when it's terrifying, can save lives, that justice, while imperfect and often too slow, can still be served if enough people refuse to be silent. I carry those lessons with me every day. When I work with survivors who are afraid no one will believe them, when I encounter systems that seem designed to protect perpetrators rather than victims, when I'm tempted to look away from something that makes me uncomfortable, I remember Jessica's face when I opened that basement door. I remember the relief and hope and desperate strength in her eyes. I remember that I almost didn't go down there, almost convinced myself I was overreacting. And I'm grateful, in a complicated, painful way, that I trusted my instincts, that I chose action over comfort, that I was willing to risk being wrong in order to possibly save someone who was in danger. If you take nothing else from my story, take this: your instincts matter, your perceptions are valid, and if you see something that doesn't feel right, don't let anyone, no matter how respectable, how kind, how seemingly beyond reproach, convince you that you're imagining things. Because somewhere, someone might be waiting in a basement for someone like you to trust themselves enough to open the door. 3 years later, I'm still healing. We all are. Jessica and I and the other survivors, the families of the women who didn't make it. Even the community that had to reconcile the image of the man they thought they knew with the reality of the monster he was. But we're healing with the knowledge that we spoke up, that we refused to let respectability politics silence us, that we chose truth over comfort, justice over peace, and somewhere out there, another woman who's feeling that same instinct I felt, that something isn't right, that the kind man might be hiding something, that she should trust her gut even when it contradicts what everyone else believes. Maybe she'll remember this story. Maybe she'll choose to investigate instead of dismiss. Maybe she'll save a life. That's why I've shared this. Not for fame or attention or sympathy, but because silence protects predators and truth protects everyone else. Trust yourself. Believe survivors. Speak up. And never forget that the most dangerous monsters are often the ones who've convinced everyone they're heroes. Richard Castellano was a wealthy landlord with a terrifying secret life. But he's not unique. There are others like him, hiding behind masks of respectability, counting on our desire to believe in human goodness to let them continue their evil. Don't let them. Your voice matters. Your instincts matter. You matter. And if you're reading this from somewhere dark, from some basement literal or metaphorical where someone has convinced you that no one will believe you, that you're too damaged or too scared or too isolated to be heard, know this: I believe you. Jessica believes you. Every survivor who's ever had to fight to be heard believes you. You are not alone. You are not imagining things. You are not crazy. Trust yourself. Speak up. Survive. And know that somewhere, we're fighting for you, believing in you, and waiting to help you find your way back to the light. That's the message. That's the lesson. That's what I learned in the brownstone on Riverside Avenue in the darkest period of my life. Evil exists, but so does courage, so does justice, so does the human capacity to survive the unsurvivable and transform pain into purpose. Be brave, be vigilant, be safe, and never ever stop trusting yourself.